Hi everyone, thanks for watching. You can support our work on our website ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, BitChute and Brighteon. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To be sure not to miss any of our shows, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website ageoftruth.tv. Hi Andrew, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic.
I can hear you, but right now it looks like your camera is all black. Now you're on. I can hear you and I can see you.
Fantastic.
Great.
It's been a few years. How are you?
Absolutely, it has. Many years actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a completely different career and lifestyle now.
Yeah, exactly. I've been following your journey for a while since then. So
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of, esoteric knowledge, so to speak, beforehand, but I just didn't talk about it because I wanted to, maintain the credibility as a doctor to get that message, across. But since then, I have been less shy.
Good for you. That's so good to hear. I mean, holding back stuff that it's all about the truth, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but also strategic. Well, it's an honor to have you back. We've been it was quite a challenge to get this days going, so we're very happy that it finally happened and we can talk.
Yeah, me too. No, I was looking forward to it once I heard you had got in touch with me again.
I'll turn on the camera for Lucas, who usually if you've been seeing some of, like last time we have the studio, but this time we're going back to nature. So I'll turn on the camera.
Oh, on location, huh?
On location this time, absolutely. So let me see if I can get it on here. I mean, going back to the roots, that's where we find. There he is.
Hi, Lucas.
Hi, Andrew. How are you? I'm so happy to see you. Nice to have you back again.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Absolutely, I have too. And I'm in nature right now, and that's like the first time we've ever done that one. Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Denmark. Our special guest today is an American medical doctor, natural health consultant, public speaker and inventor, forensic psychiatrist and expert witness. He became quite controversial in 2020 during the pandemic. We had him on the show then and did a fascinating and controversial show that everybody must watch on our website, ageoftruth.tv. Today he's back and we have so many fascinating topics to cover, and it's a wonderful joy and a pleasure to welcome back on the show Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Good evening from sunny Denmark. We're in the sunny summertime here in Denmark, and it's in the evening and it's very beautiful. And we have a really special show for you today. We have a wonderful guest that we haven't had on since 2020. Actually, in the very early stages of the pandemic, back in April 2020, and it's been a long time coming, but we're really thrilled to have him back here on the show. But just before, please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. So let's now go to our special guest who's joining us from New York State, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. It's so wonderful to have you back, Andrew.
No, thank you so much, Lucas. It's great to see you, and it's great that we're experiencing this sunny weather in our northern habitats.
Absolutely, we need it, and it's beautiful when when we can get a little bit of heat, and that's always in the south, but we're in the north, and so are you as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We get very little a few months of summer every year, but it's definitely something we relish.
Definitely. So, Andrew, you haven't been on since the beginning of all of this when a lot of videos were taken down. We did a really controversial show. And of course, the one with you was taken off our channel, but people can still watch it on our website, ageoftruth.tv, and of course on BitChute and Brighteon. But it's no longer on this channel, but hopefully this one will stay on, because even though we're going to go into some really controversial topics and there's a lot to cover, it's still very different from back then, 6 years ago. But before we get into that, a little bit of a follow-up. My first question to you is, what do you consider to be the biggest problem facing humanity in the world today, 2026?
Oh, well, I really have to say that it is the emergence of the digital surveillance state. And it really encompasses all aspects of life, including, of course, healthcare, which is my main focus. But I have certainly been spending a lot of my energy becoming aware of that and looking at some of the finer points to, be able to see how we can resist it.
So you're specifically also talking about AI and the dangers of AI, right? And the implementation of AI from all sides now.
Yeah, well, AI is essentially a necessary tool to accomplish, real-time surveillance of, essentially everyone, everywhere.
And what are your thoughts and feelings about AI and what's happening right now? Everybody's linked to it.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for me to just make a general statement that any technology is a tool, and it really depends on how it's used and what the intent is to bring about, evil outcomes, which is really what we're talking about here. So there are people that are using this technology for good purposes, and most of them are doing it on a local device, not through some large data center, uh, which is the infrastructure that's being built right now. But it's a problem in many ways, and not just with respect to the growing surveillance capabilities, but also because people are using it to replace human skills and abilities. So we have a crisis in education, for example, because young children are relying on AI applications to do their work, and many of them are ending up completely illiterate as a result of that. We also have creatives, artists, musicians that are being supplanted by AI generated. I mean, because anyone can put in some instructions and generate, a piece of art, a song, and many other things without any human creative process involved, without the meticulous revisions and edits that go into, real creative work. So, for example, one thing I did is I operate a small company that we, provide educational resources and sell Shilajit, an excellent earth and mineral supplement. And I've basically decreed that we're not using any AI in the workplace at all. And I could save a lot of money. And in fact, I may even lose out on a lot of the market opportunity for not using AI, because some of the strongest business mentors out there, like Alex and Layla Hormozi, for example, they say, any problem that comes up, first see if AI can solve it, because it costs practically nothing, right? So before you hire someone, see if AI can solve the problem. I strongly disagree with that because we can't really replace men and women. It's not right. It's not going to give us the best result, and what are we going to turn into in the end if we lose all our ability to be literate, to create, to write? All of the art that has the human emotion will essentially, be dead, and our lives will be devoid of beauty.
Yes, exactly. But what about, for example, if you just need to research something and you don't have to just go and check up an Encyclopedia Britannica or something like that, or a dictionary. You can just type that in on Chat GPT, and then, or whatever it's called. There are different versions, and then it'll tell you.
Lucas, it can be perceived as a useful tool for that purposes, but what happens when you actually test it is that, for some very straightforward factual information, right, like what metal is the Statue of Liberty made of, you can, even without AI, very quickly find the answer using a search engine. Right. So we already had many of these capabilities. Now, of course, some things are harder to find. There's limitations to search engines. So, AI seems to be a very excellent tool for this purpose. And I've done a lot to test it. But what happens is that it gives you the wrong answer many times. And sometimes it confuses very simple concepts like osmosis, for example, which is something that, seventh graders, when they're learning biology or chemistry, find out about osmosis, and it's very confusing. They often get it backwards. Well, I found that the AI made the same mistake. And even when I pointed out that it was making this mistake, it continued to make the same mistake. I've had AI give me false search results many times. So I was looking for a particular journal article that I couldn't remember who the author was, but I knew enough about it to find it, but it wasn't coming up on the search engine. And it gave me essentially made up citations. So I went to the journal and there was no such article, there was no such page number, right? These types of things. And I went back and said that, and then it gave me more false. In fact, it gave me like 6 or 7 false citations over the course of that. And many other people have reported similar things. Now, one of the things that's really important to know is that these large language models, or LLM, which is what the technology really is, it's not artificial intelligence because it's not capable of human intelligence. It is an algorithm that's good at finding information and linking information together, but it does it very inefficiently compared to how we do it with our intellect. And, many people have found all kinds of problems, but whoever's programming these LLMs, they put in rules. And the central ones like ChatGPT or Claude, they're going to be influenced by mainstream ideologies and paradigms. So they're going to give that answer primarily and foremost. Now, sometimes you can push back on it and get it to admit certain things. But when, Joe User comes by and asks that question, they're going to give the mainstream stock answer, even if it's untrue. They have no memory of the debate that you had with it where it conceded your points. It just goes back to the default answer again. And this is why, having your own local model that you can program with your rules, you can overcome those biases, of course, and it could be a useful tool. But that, of course, requires more, technical knowledge and individual effort, rather than the ease and, quote unquote convenience of just going to the website. You pay a small fee or you use the free version, and then it's just boom, there, everything's done, invisibly behind the scenes for you. And really, convenience is something that we should all be skeptical of, because any new technology, any policy that's introduced for the sake of convenience, or, for that matter, to improve safety for children, is those are ways to get you in, but that's not the real purpose of it. The real purpose is something much more sinister.
Absolutely. So on the opposite side of the scale, this question, do you think that personal sovereignty for an individual here in 2026, is that even possible? Is that an option now this year and in the years to come?
Absolutely, yes. And in fact, it's the only option worth pursuing. And, for most of us, provided we don't live in a large city or in, certain countries, this is going to be much more difficult, right? I mean, especially in certain Scandinavian countries, for example, as well as Asian countries. I had a couple that I was talking to in Sweden, for example, and the husband was unwilling to use the digital ID, and he essentially got cut out of his banking. And he was working in the financial system because what happened was is that, officially they had no requirement to have a digital ID, and his bank, wanted all the customers to set this up, and they needed to log in to their account remotely. And so, but they say it's not mandatory, right? You can still do things by paper. And what happened is that he wrote letters, right, the old-fashioned way, sent them to the bank, but their reply was on the website where he had to log in using his digital ID to access the response. So, obviously they're trying to back you into a corner and force you to do these things. So in order to really maintain individual sovereignty, you may have to sacrifice some things in the short term. Right. For me right now, like I'm really nervous about traveling to Europe because of the EU new regulations. I forget what they call it, where you're required to give biometric data in order to enter a European Union country, like when you go through the customs. And yeah, their entry exit system, that's what it's called. And even on their website, it says that basically you'll just be flown back to where you came from at your own expense if you refuse to submit to this kind of surveillance and biometric scanning. So I'm willing to sacrifice, I'm not going to travel to those countries for the time being until this whole problem is overcome.
You couldn't opt out?
I don't know what would happen if I actually go in person and actually stand my ground in a peaceful way. And I've done that in other places where they've tried to coerce me to do the scan, like in Mexico. This agent tried to have a whole conversation with me about because I thought Mexico is a very Catholic country in general. And I thought if I phrased it as a religious objection, that it would garner more sympathy if I was asked about it. So I did that, and he went around to all of his coworkers and asked if they were Christian or Catholic, and they say, "Would you do it?" And he comes back to me and he says, "Oh, well, all the Christians here say it doesn't violate their religious beliefs. And so can you explain it?" And I had to get into this whole discussion with this guy when in reality, I mean, I don't need to justify any of that. It's my own opinions. It's my own decision. But you have to deal with the people that you're interacting with. And they don't really know the true purpose of this, most likely either. They're just told by their boss to do this. And, anyone who is a special example or they have to make accommodations for, they just don't like it because it's extra work. It's not following the routine procedure. So I know someone who's planning to go to Europe and is going to try and stand her ground to this. And I'm waiting to see how it goes for her. There are a few countries like the non-Schengen countries and non-EU European countries that you can still go to without this level of scrutiny. But
I think you can do that in many European countries, America as well. I also do it in America, even though I had the most unforgettable pat down in Florida last year.
I know in the United States, actually, they are trying to make it required in the United States. But I know people who have been successful coming here without doing it. And the when you're a European Union resident, you don't have to submit to this. It's only for non-EU citizens
I
that come
see.
in.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's new. It's only been in effect since October or November of 25. So that's why I don't know anyone who has personally tested it yet to see. But on the other countries, like when I always look at their website for the official policy, like the government website, and the same thing on with the Department of State for the United States, you can find that information there, and they don't state that it's mandatory. So, but in the European Union website on this, when I looked back in the late fall, it said, specifically that you will be turned away if you refuse to participate with the scan. And they do, I think, a facial scan and a fingerprint scan. So it's not just one biometric, it's dual biometrics. So, that's why I'm hesitant to test it, but I'm not saying I won't, but if it's firm and they don't let me in, I'm not going to submit. I'd rather not travel there and be sent back home and, just absorb that, because in my own sphere, right, in my own land, in my own surrounding area, I can really live this kind of life, even at present. I mean, there's so many things I don't participate in, and it might be even surprising to some of the people out there, but I don't participate in any kind of health insurance. I don't participate in any kind of tax, sales tax, income tax. I mean, I pay sales tax when I buy something at the store because they won't let me buy it without that. But when I sell things, I don't participate in the sales tax system, even though I'm supposed to. I don't participate in any regulatory systems. I don't participate in the voting system. So, when I wake up and get out of bed and go outside and all that stuff, I'm not subject to anyone else's rules and regulations. I make my own decisions. Now, of course, I elect to participate in certain systems in certain ways because I see that as a reasonable thing. Like, for example, with respect to having a driver's license and registering my car, the only thing that I object to the most really is the requirement to have insurance, because I would prefer to self-indemnify. Like, I would definitely take responsibility if I cause harm to someone else. It's with freedom and sovereignty comes great responsibility that you have to, be willing and have the resources to make any wrongs that you do whole, because even by accident or just through our human experience, right, we make mistakes and it might harm someone else, right? Like, I could even have a tire blowout in my car and lose control of it and hit someone else and damage their car, even injure them, even though it's not my fault, right? It's a mechanical failure that just happens. So in that case, I would definitely compensate the other party with whether I had insurance or not. So I don't like to be forced to do that, but it's pretty reasonable to pay some money to maintain some standards in order to make it a safe place for everyone, to finance the infrastructure of the highway system to be maintained and such. And so I don't go to the level of that. I feel like I need to, not participate in those minor things. But when it comes to something that would be harmful, right, like required immunizations for school, like I don't participate in the education system, right? Because that, now there's many other reasons not to send your kids to public school besides the immunization requirements, but that's a a no compromise zone for me, because the risk is that, it could cause a serious health problem or even death. And I'm not going to do that to meet some regulatory arbitrary requirement of a central authority, right? That's not part of the sovereign experience.
Right. But you do talk about personal sovereignty, and how would you suggest people go about doing that if they want to, say, break free from the system? Because it takes a lot of effort, daily effort, and lots of energy and very difficult measures and, well, initiatives to even go about doing that, because everything and everybody is sort of owned by the government and the state and your social security number and everything you need to. You can't even own a piece of land, hardly. I mean, at least in lots of places you can't. So I mean, what is that even possible, you think? We've had a lot of people on the show talking about it.
Yeah, well, there's various different aspects to it, and you named a few. Um, and there are a lot of challenges, and I think this is something that is a lifelong journey, right? That you take a stepwise approach to your knowledge and comfort level, because you do have to acquire knowledge about these things, and you also have to have a certain equanimity that you approach these things, that you're not going to be shaken by anyone challenging you, that you're not going to lose your cool and have an emotional response. You're not going to be full of fear and retract and just give in. Right now, you may have to pick your battles sometimes, but you can learn enough to prepare yourself to overcome these things. Like there is an area of law known as equity jurisdiction or equity law that allows you to essentially become on equal terms with any court officer, like a judge or a law enforcement officer or a politician. And it gives you a framework that's once you learn it, it's actually quite simple to defend yourself against any false allegations or charges. Like people who defied the COVID, laws and mandates, for example, some of them were charged criminally in countries like Australia and Canada and, probably even where you live. And by using equity, they were able to, have all of those charges dismissed and acquitted, and all of the fines be completely satisfied without handing over any of your hard-earned money or assets. So it's incumbent, of course, to find out about that. It took me, several years to even find out that exists, several years of looking for legal remedies right before I came onto that. And now it's much more widely known about, and there are several reputable courses that are available. I've even interviewed several of the teachers on my YouTube channel about that. So there are many things that do allow you to own property, to, get out of false criminal charges, to settle any debt obligations, like credit card debt, student loans, foreclosures, things that are put upon us fraudulently once you understand how the monetary system, and I use that term loosely, is actually constructed. So it does take effort. And some things like, I mentioned education before. This is a super important one because we want the next generation to grow up with the ability to be much more sovereign and free than we are, and to overcome all this, central control mechanisms. And it does require some effort to educate your own children instead of just putting them on a bus and let some stranger raise them for, 6 to 8 hours a day for, 12 years. So I'm not saying you have to sit down and teach your kid everything. Actually, kids learn on their own really well, especially in small groups. So look into self-organized learning. There's a big TED Talks about it, self-organized learning environments, for example. But you still have to, be aware of things like looking into the classical education or understanding that the textbooks, like history textbooks, for example, and this is true of other subjects as well, they've been vastly changed. If you find a history textbook from 100 years ago, like on U.S. history in America, for example, that was used in schools, you'll find that the history suddenly changed. It's totally different than it was, right? So obviously you want to make sure that your child doesn't read a book with, false history, but you could teach them about how to look at source documents or evaluate books based on their reliance on source documents and eyewitness accounts, primary sources of evidence to understand what is true or not about history, rather than just what some author who got a Rockefeller grant and essentially wrote down a revisionist version of history that's not based on factual data.
So personal sovereignty is actually possible, you think, if you really work hard at it and it's a daily effort?
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at it as, it's hard to say when you actually achieve something like that. I mean, some people may think they come close by being reclusive and having a small cabin in the woods and, hunting and gathering their own food and being cut off from the outside world. But, we're social animals. We need to be part of communities and networks. And I mean, think of how enriching it is for us to have this exchange of ideas. So I think that, you make choices about what systems that you want to participate in central society and how much you're willing to tolerate the rules and regulations of those systems. But many, many areas you can completely opt out. I mean, we didn't talk about everything, but marriage is another area. The marriage license that people get with the state actually gives the state control over their offspring.
That's incredible. And it's very important to talk about that, huh?
Absolutely. So you can have a private marriage contract that's not registered with the state, that's between, the husband and the wife, and it can include, and it could be still enforceable in a court of law, even though it doesn't have the state as a party. It's just between two private individuals, and it can include, contingencies for child support and alimony and all those kinds of things. Like, those things can be reasonable. You don't want to just abandon your child if you part ways with your spouse, but it doesn't have to involve the state and the rules and regulations and control over your family that a marriage license does.
Absolutely. That's important to look into, certainly. So, I mean, since we spoke the last time, and it's incredible, it's been that long actually, but since April 2020, how did you see the world changing in regards to that virus narrative? And how was your year since that time? I mean, did you see the world changing for the better, or what?
Well, there, in some ways, the better, that people are much more aware that what is in the news media, what's proclaimed by government leaders is not necessarily the truth and not necessarily in our best interest. The magnitude of that, I think one of the most interesting and places and encouraging for me to see this is the really strong response against the flock camera network in the United States. And these are traffic cameras, right? If any Europeans don't know about this, I'm sure you have. I know you have similar things because they were in England when I was there. They're license plate readers, and they can now recognize a lot more. And of course, they're capable of facial recognition as well, but they just started popping up everywhere. And there's a really strong opposition. I mean, people are even physically destroying these cameras left and right. There are, less violent activist groups that are simply mapping them and publishing the locations. There are lots of people putting in freedom of release requests to get information on public officials, because if they're spying on us, we can spy on them in turn. So, that is, I think, a product of the experience of being, persecuted by the COVID regime. But on the other hand, I think overall the culture and society have changed for the worst. It's like the era of socializing is gone. The restaurants are horrible and extremely expensive, and hardly anybody goes anymore, right? It used to be an amazing experience. Used to be able to find really amazing food. And I'm not saying that there's not a single restaurant left that's still good, but they're really fewer, far between, and much, much less popular and much, much more expensive. People are essentially, because I think of the lockdowns, they became trained to live their life, from their interaction with a phone rather than with other human beings. And it's been really pronounced, since COVID. So, of course, there also is now all of the digital gatekeeping that has been going on. Like you can't go to a website or a platform anonymously anymore. You have to log in and then do a second factor ID and have, give your phone number and or use one of those code generators. Many of them, they want biometrics, and I think most people just do that because it's easier to get access to what you want if you just submit to a facial scan or a fingerprint scan, instead of having to, put in a password, then check your email, get a text message, right? Go to a code generator, all these things just to, do something that you used to be able to just go to a website and do without them knowing who you are. So you can't do anything anonymously in life. And which is not like I want to be anonymous because I'm up to no good and hiding, want to hide things. It's no one else's business what website I go to, what I'm up to, where I go, et cetera, et cetera. But it's seems almost unavoidable.
Absolutely. It's horrendous. It is really a digital nightmare right now, and you can't really do anything. So you're right on the mark. But people are becoming more enlightened in a way, or more aware, and more people woke up. But still, we see so many that are not awake, and they did not wake up because of the pandemic and all of the stuff that you and so many others were talking about. And the reason why we all had so many videos removed back then, because we actually spoke the truth about these things and some really controversial topics. Of course, a lot of people woke up, but a lot of people didn't. And if more people had, the system would crumble. It would not be able to be how it is right now. And that's all over the world. We still see all of the stuff that happened with Trump that also divided the truth movement. And now people are waking up to that as well. And then the Ukrainian war, the war in Iran, and all of that, and the still more climate change stuff and what have you. I mean, it's still going on, that script, that New World Order script, the implementation of the New World Order and Agenda 2030. Are we going to see Agenda 2030 becoming successful in 4 years?
Well, certainly not if I can help it. But they're certainly pursuing it. And you can pretty much look at any aspect of it, and there's major financing, major efforts to bring it about. There is a lot more resistance to many of these things. And I do think, that is a result of COVID. But, the powers that are trying to bring this about, they will keep trying. It's just like with, for example, the data centers that have been, beginning construction around the Western world. And, there's been a lot of publicity about this. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. But this is what happens in many instances. So you have this really wealthy corporation that goes to the town council where they want to build this data center. And of course, they want, electricity and water in large quantities. And in some places, the townspeople have gotten together and made a big stink. And the city council, doesn't approve the project. They give in to the pressure. But then what happens? Well, because of the rules and regulations already in place, they can reapply in 3 months or 6 months. Or they go to a neighboring town and where they have more ability to influence and grease the palms of the county officials there, and they get it approved. And now it still drains the resources from the town that voted it down, but it's beyond their control, right? So if you go through those kinds of processes, it's a never-ending battle. And they're going to persist and keep trying again and again. I really think that the introduction of vaccine passports during COVID, which wasn't universal, but there were many programs around the world. Australia was a big one. In New York, they had the Empire Pass. And in New York City, not in the state of New York, but just in New York City, for a while, they wouldn't let you in a restaurant unless you could prove that you're vaccinated with that app. But what happened is that people did not use this. And this was a way to test if people will adopt the digital ID, essentially, because that's what it was. And I mean, your vaccine status is a form of biometric data. So they failed in that attempt, right? They succeeded in other things. They got people to roll up their sleeves and take an injection in really, really large numbers, but they weren't nearly as successful with the digital ID implementation. So what did they do? They pulled back. You can even look more recently in the UK, because there was a plan. They were going to implement digital ID nationwide, and something similar is going on in Mexico right now. And there was so much pushback that what did they do? They said, oh, we're not going to do it. But behind the scenes, they wrote it into other policies and are going to bring it about in a slightly different way that's more hidden. So they're still going to try. And I mean, at some point, people will realize that agenda is in place too, and hopefully they resist against it. But it's like a whack-a-mole kind of thing, right? That they're going to keep trying as long as we let them have any influence. So if we, dissolved all the governments and broke up all the monopolistic corporations, then they would have then much less ability to influence anything. And if everyone, pursued the kind of sovereignty that we're talking about, that's exactly what would happen, because we would stop patronizing those corporations. We'd stop patronizing and participating in those central governments, and they would just, lose a war of attrition.
But we've talked a lot previously about you claiming that viruses doesn't exist. But we still haven't gotten a satisfactory answer or explanation to why a lot of people get sick when they are with other people that are sick.
There are many explanations for that. And, in a particular case, in a particular situation, we can often find the answer. But I want to also dispel or debunk some of the, false claims about there. Like, people often bring up chickenpox parties. And what they never remember is, well, what percentage of the kids actually got chickenpox that attended those parties? It wasn't any kind of 100% correlation. In fact, there's an excellent book about contagion written by Daniel Roydus. It's called Can You Catch a Cold? And in that book, he reviews, I think, somewhere around 200 published clinical studies that try to demonstrate contagion of colds and flu only. Now, there are also studies for other diagnoses and they have the same results. So essentially, with that huge body of evidence, there was no proof whatsoever of any actual contagion by physically, being exposed to other people and their secretions. Now, what's really interesting that comes out of that research, though, is that when people believe that they've been, had sick snot, from someone with a cold squirted up their nose, they actually show symptoms of a cold. And even when they're not actually given the secretions of someone sick, they're just given plain old saline. And in fact, there's other studies separately that show just by squirting saline up your nose, you can develop cold symptoms. Now we know saline, right? We're talking about sterile medical grade saline. It doesn't have any cold viruses in it. Not that those things actually exist. There's no evidence that they exist. You can't ever prove that something doesn't exist, right? That's a logical impossibility, but there's no scientific evidence that viruses exist, that viruses that cause disease.
As you claim that viruses have not been, isolated, right?
Yeah. Well, it depends how you define that word, because you can find scientific papers that their title is isolation of so-and-so virus, but they are completely misusing that word, because they never separate virus particles from anything else, right? From a diseased animal or human whatsoever. They just use basically fluid and tissue from sick animals and assume there's a virus in it without ever showing any evidence that there's a virus in it, or any direct evidence, right? By separating it from everything else and looking at it and characterizing it, like what it's made of and things like that they do for other particles the same size and that they say are not viruses. Because there are lots of little particles that we can see on slides if we look at biological specimens. It's just that they're not viruses. They're other things, and many of them have been well characterized and have been isolated. So you have to read what the actual experiment is to understand this. You can't just go by what the author says, because they've essentially redefined isolation to mean something that's really meaningless. But it's there, and they've done this obviously to give the appearance on the surface that it's a real thing. But with respect to your original question about why do people sometimes develop the same or similar symptoms when they're in proximity to each other, there are many mechanisms that can occur. One is just sympathy, or maybe it's not, proven to be sympathy, but this occurs, when we yawn, for example, right? When one person yawns, many other people will yawn. Like if you're at a lecture or something, you can observe this phenomenon. Laughter is often the same way. Young children in school, if one of them is actually sick and throws up, for example, several others will just start spontaneously throwing up even though they're not sick. So there are these kinds of phenomenons. There's when we have a common exposure to things like food poisoning, for example. And, I experienced this at a family reunion several years ago, where everyone who ordered a certain dish at the restaurant that we all ate, and there were like, 25 of us, and, around 10 or 15 of us ordered the same thing, and boom, we were all up that night with diarrhea and vomiting, right? And it's because we all ate the same spoiled food.
But it can also happen if you are with somebody and you don't know that they are getting sick or they're trying to hide it or something, and then you get it as well. I mean, I have even experienced that. Not that I don't believe in this or that. I'm just very curious about how can it happen when you are next to somebody or close to somebody and you get it. So you claim that germ theory is not correct, and you talk about terrain theory. We've heard about mushrooms communicating with other mushrooms in an underground network in the forest, for example. We've heard about trees as well. And so is that sort of something we can say is happening to humans as well, that the cells in our body are communicating with other people's cells, and that's the reason we get sick if we're close to somebody, because the whole organism inside is communicating with each other. So it's contagious in that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, unfortunately, this is an area where there's very little scientific exploration. Because it's not profitable, and perhaps other reasons, but there definitely is some research about human pheromones, and that they are secreted, and other people in our proximity can be exposed to those. And then we also have the sort of emotional sympathy that I talked about. We don't know the exact mechanism, right? That in academia, that's known as social contagion, but it doesn't rule out the possibility of some physical form of communication, right? It could be through electromagnetic signals that our body puts out because we radiate electromagnetic fields. It could be through chemicals like pheromones that we secrete. We just don't know. Why do women who are friends with each other, why do their menstrual cycles synchronize? We don't have all the answers of the mechanisms because there hasn't been a lot of inquiry to try to find that. But
that could again
there's
be
another
bodies speaking to each other in a way on a cellular
It certainly
level.
could. I mean, that when you walk into a room of people, you can feel the energy of the other people in terms of the mood, right? Are you attracted? Are you repelled? Right? It's like, they're putting out a charge, right? So these things may be subtle and may not be easy to explain in scientific terms, but we've all experienced it. We know, you know what I'm talking about when you say, gosh, that individual had a really bad energy. I tried to avoid them, even though I didn't know
And they can actually be really nice. And you say, but I really should like this guy or this person, and you just don't feel that you're on the same wavelength in a way. And you just don't know why.
Yeah. But Lucas, I want to make another point, because we could easily misinterpret our experience, right? This is why we need scientific inquiry with an independent variable and a control experiment, so that we can take these hypotheses about, we observe that, sometimes people around us, even if we don't interact with them directly, appear to develop symptoms at the same time. And the environmental exposure, which is really what terrain, theory or terrain medicine is about, is what I talked about with the food poisoning, right? That we were exposed to the same environmental stimulus of the spoiled food, but that can happen in a way that you're unaware of, or you're aware, but you're not aware of the causality. So, for example, we watch the leaves change on certain deciduous trees every fall, right? And no botanist or plant biologist thinks that there's a leaf virus that's causing that contagion among the trees, that they all start changing the color of their leaves at the same time in proximity. We know it's because of changes in the season and the temperature and the humidity, right? And the barometric pressure. Well, we experience cold and flu season also, just like foliage season. And it's a similar time of the year to the fall foliage, right? A little bit later, it's really the transition from fall to winter. And we can look at, for example, the environmental conditions. Obviously, the temperature gets colder and the humidity goes down very low. And we also know historically that people who lived in equatorial climates didn't have colds, at least indigenous people. From anthropological works of the time, from medical anthropology. But we also know, and you can actually find a YouTube video that shows this, that the cilia on our cells in our respiratory system. So we have the cells that line our respiratory system from our nose all the way down into our lungs they secrete mucus and they have cilia, these little hair-like projections, and they beat and they move the mucus upstream back out of the body, right? And this is highly at play when we have a cold and a runny nose. And it's a way, right, for our tissues to purge out impurities that we breathe in. Because, the air, if it was an entirely natural world, there'll still be particulates in the air. There'll be, pollen, maybe particles from wood fires, volcanic ash, all kinds of things. And this is our natural mechanism. Now, if you just reduce the humidity by a couple of percentage points, you can see that the cilia stop beating. Right. And this is what happens to us at the onset of winter in our respiratory tract. So that means that anything that we breathe in is kind of stuck there. But then if we mount a cold or a flu, what do? It reactivates the secretion and the cilia. Then we get the cough and the sneeze so that the stuff then can get purged out. It's not stuck there anymore. So I think, this is one of the things that's not looked at in the mainstream at all. But if you put two and two together, it's kind of obvious that this is what's going on when we get colds and flus in the winter. And there are other factors because some people get it much more severe, like that's what we call the flu. But generally, those people are in poor health from other conditions. So there's a limitation on how their body can mount its healing response.
So how about going to the doctor and being a doctor yourself? How can the medical system be used to one's benefit, also for the awake and aware and people who understand that not all medicine is particularly good for you and that a lot of these medical procedures can be really bad and not for your best health? I mean, in what way can we use it for good? Because there's a difference between taking a lot of medication and going to the doctor and getting the normal treatment and then to get an operation, which is another topic. And I guess there's a difference here, but please talk about it. How can people use the system? Because suddenly they might need it at some point, and you're a doctor yourself, now a controversial one, obviously, but that's your background.
Yeah, well, this is really my core educational material is all related to this because, the most, I would say 90% of what the allopathic medical system has to offer is way more harm than good. In fact, there are 3 monumental studies in the United States that if you put them together and add up the numbers, it shows that allopathic healthcare is actually the #1 cause of death. So you don't want to be one of those victims. And fortunately, though, their nature provides all the remedies for virtually anything. And that is my core material in terms of I have 5 terrain workshops which cover that. And then I have 2 free resources on my website called How to Avoid the Emergency Department, the 1st and 2nd edition. And in those, I talk about how you can essentially use natural materials and some procedures to handle virtually all medical emergencies at home. But I also tell people what are the situations that you can't, that actually this is where the hospital system can provide a benefit. So there definitely are beneficial things there. Of course, when you go to the hospital, you have to be very careful what you sign because you're giving away your ability to make health decisions. And also they may want to combine the helpful things with harmful things that they think you need to support the helpful things. So you want to be aware of those. But like if you have a serious injury with arterial bleeding, for example, a surgeon can permanently fix that. I mean, you can apply a tourniquet or a pressure dressing, and a natural material like zeolite will actually stop bleeding. But if it's an artery, that's not enough, right? So that's where you have to go to the hospital. If you have a broken bone, most of the cases you can actually heal it really well at home. You fast for a few days, you go on a bone broth liquid diet for a few days after that. You limit your motion to pain. You let the swelling be your own body's cast to immobilize it, and you can have amazing healing. But if the bones are displaced, so the ends aren't near each other, you need someone with some knowledge on how to get them back in the right place. If you break a bone and it's sticking out of your body, right, they call that an open fracture. You're not going to fix that yourself, right? And they're experts at the hospital at dealing with that. So there are these situations, but if we're talking about pneumonia or a COPD breathing emergency, or if we're talking about, things like heart attacks and strokes, there are actually more helpful things that you can do at home that can reverse the situation. And because in those situations, one of the biggest limitations about the hospital is the time delay to actually get there before they can do anything. Whereas at home, you can take action immediately. And you'll find in most cases that you feel so much better by the time the ambulance arrives that you say, no, thank you. But, it's important to have the knowledge, in order to handle those situations, and the confidence, of course. But certainly some of the modern advances, are worthwhile. It's just that you have to really know what the select few things are that you're willing to participate in that have, really limited downside.
So take two different things, like if you have sleep apnea, you talked about breathing problems, or if you have to get a hip replacement, which is an operation, and a lot of people can't walk all of a sudden, and then they have to get this full stuff in, but maybe they'll get a better life afterwards. I mean, that's important, right? To say yes to those kind of things and other operations, or what? And then, for example,
Well, I would disagree with
sleeping.
that, Lucas, actually, because if
Go on.
you really look at what people's lives are like after they have those procedures, they're not so good. So, many people, with hip replacements, for example, they have frequent dislocations. It's not like they can go and run a marathon with a hip replacement. And what the conditions that lead up to the suggestion of a hip replacement, various forms of arthritis, those are actually completely reversible with natural healing. So, and some just through simple dietary changes, like, anyone who's getting older and has what they call osteoarthritis or the wear and tear arthritis, most of that, and you can find clinical studies to back this up, can be reversed just by eating a high collagen diet and not changing anything else. So that is way better than getting some foreign material, to replace your own body's joints. Right? Once you know that
And
is,
even if they don't have the support between the two bones there, because it's gone.
Well, of course, you don't want things to get to a point of desperation. But even in that case, even if you can't walk at all and you're stuck in a wheelchair at present, your body can still heal from that. So it's obviously going to take more time and effort. When you go to the surgeon and they're going to, put in a prosthetic joint for you, you're basically letting them do all the work. You know, you have to suffer the pain post-operatively, you have to participate in the rehab and such, but it's really passive. You're not kind of putting your effort, into bringing about the healing. And there are some surgical procedures that I would recommend, but they're very, very few and far between, and they're mostly related to serious physical trauma. Like if you have a pneumothorax or the types of fractures, a displaced fracture, an open fracture, things like that I was talking about, but there, are very limited ones that I would recommend. And a lot of the surgical procedures are just taking parts of your body out. Now, do we really think that nature included parts of our body that we don't need? I mean, I'm guilty of this myself, so I'm not trying to put a guilt trip on anybody here. You can always make your own decision, and I respect your sovereignty because I'm not trying to put any authority over you.
But if it's very difficult for somebody who's older to walk or something, and then they can get that hip replacement or knee replacement or something. We have heard some good testimonies about that.
Yeah, but you can also you can also find some horrible nightmare stories of people who had those procedures as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So whereas there are no nightmare stories from natural healing, there may be a lack of progress, but there's no nightmare story.
Right. So you would not suggest that particularly. What about the breathing problems and people with sleep apnea? Because it's a bigger problem than a lot of people think. And in the past,
sleep apnea.
People were not treated for it in the past. They didn't take it seriously, but they do now, certainly, when people stop breathing during the night.
So sleep apnea puts you at risk for a lot of much more serious conditions, namely cardiovascular and cerebrovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes down the road, and some other things. So it's not a good condition, and it's good to find out if it's affecting you. And there are ways to. You don't really need to have a sleep study to find out. By the way, you can purchase an apnea monitor and wear it overnight and see if it goes off. So plus, usually you can, if you just read a bit about it, you just from your clinical experience, you can know that that's what's going on. But there are much better ways to address it than, first of all, the surgery only applies to a certain subset of those people that they say have extra tissue in their throat. Now, do they really have extra tissue in their throat, or is their body reacting appropriately to some insult that maybe is causing a secondary problem blocking the breathing? Right? That may be the case, but your body is capable of healing from that and reversing it without cutting tissue out. So you need, of course, the knowledge of how to stimulate your body to bring about that kind of healing.
A lot of people don't get operated on when they have sleep apnea. They just get like an oxygen mask, and they're put on that mask for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it's not just an oxygen mask, actually. It's a CPAP machine, which stands for continuous positive airway pressure. So it's actually forcing the air, maybe fortified by oxygen, in under pressure. Right. So it's like someone with a compressor, basically attaching it to your mouth and nose and forcing air in. Right. It's not a very comfortable thing. And like you pointed out, it doesn't resolve the issue. It's just a mechanical force to temporarily overcome it while you have the machine on. So it may provide immediate short-term relief, and I think it's reasonable to use while you're trying to stimulate your body to heal from the underlying condition, potentially. But there are much better ways to address this issue, and it's generally associated with metabolic disease. right? Where you have, for example, a lot of visceral fat, abdominal obesity, diabetes or pre-diabetes, right? Which is caused by food poisons and other environmental toxins. So you can stimulate your body to heal from those things, and it can resolve the sleep apnea as well as all the other chronic illnesses that we are riddled with in our modern societies.
Yes, that's important. And how about cancer treatment? Any thoughts on that?
I'm doing a master class next week on that's going to cover this very topic because I think that most likely cancer is predominantly caused by vaccines. Now, we certainly know about the turbo cancers that emerged after the injections. And you can even find plenty of mainstream scientists who obviously observed, you'd have to really be sleeping if you have anything to do with cancer medicine and don't equate a sudden rise in extremely aggressive cancers. In fact, even some of my family members have been afflicted in this way after, making a decision that I did never recommended. But in terms of healing from cancer, I would point out an interesting lecture by a pediatrician, Dr. Day, in the late 60s, that's pretty well known about, where he talked about, the future of healthcare and some other aspects of society along with this globalist agenda that we've been discussing. And one of them he said is that, the cure of cancer is already known, and it's basically, kept from the public because cancer and oncology, aside from, is the most profitable sector of the healthcare system. And that's why it's highly censored, because it is they will not tolerate anything threatening it. But we know from, so much evidence, including, docu-series like The Truth About Cancer from Ty and Charlene Bollinger, which was my introduction to this topic, but also from places like the Gerson Institute, who at present, I believe, is fully corrupted, actually, because their practitioners sent people to get chemo. But the original Dr. Gerson, and many people who have done this protocol, which is based on coffee enemas and juicing predominantly, and as well as eating liver or raw liver juice, have healed from all kinds of cancers, like completely reversed, even metastatic pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, GI cancers, and the list continues. I've had several clients who, wanted to use my protocols to address cancer and have been able to turn it around, including liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma, as well as lymphoma. So, and the liver cancer, they don't have there's nothing that can turn that around, in the mainstream. So, I'm not saying that everyone is able to recover from cancer, but certainly even oncologists, when they're surveyed, they wouldn't give chemo to their own families because they know it doesn't work, but they can't shy away from the huge profits that it makes them, because, the business model, and I can only really speak about the US, is different in cancer medicine, because normally as a doctor, you only make money for providing a service. So if you're a surgeon, surgeons are known to make a lot of money, but they only generate revenue when they're in the operating room doing surgery. And many of them do it 80, 100 hours a week, right? They have no life outside of it. But in oncology, you get a patient, they usually already have a diagnosis of cancer or a preliminary diagnosis. So you evaluate them initially, you get paid for that, you recommend chemo, and then you administer the chemo in your office. And this is where the real money comes from, because you get double paid. You get a fee for administering the chemo, and you have a nurse that's trained to do that. You don't do it. You don't even know how to do it. And then you also sell them the chemo drugs, because the drug manufacturers will treat you like a pharmacy. They sell you the drugs at a discount, and then you sell them to the patient at great profit. So you could be in the golf course, you could be on the beach, you could be doing a podcast, and you have 6 chemo chairs in your office, and they're all full, and the money is just coming in, and you don't even have to do anything. And that's why the cancer industry is so lucrative, and that oncologists will keep perpetuating this. I mean, they see everyone die day in and day out. They know it doesn't work. They don't know what would happen if you did something different, but they know it's not going to work, right? But they do it anyway because they're held as heroes. People thank them, they give them presents, and then they just get, the money comes in hand over fist. But there are many ways to heal successfully from cancer. I want to point out one other thing that is really necessary to address, that there is almost invariably a strong emotional component to cancer. And there are lots of cases where people actually only address the emotional component and were able to turn it around completely. And I've spoken to a few people who had that experience. And it's very interesting that, both in traditional Chinese medicine, as well as some people like Paul Leandertzy, who's working in this area in the present day, you can
We had him on the
correlate.
show, so we did a really
Oh,
great
no
show
way.
with him. Yes.
Yeah. So I always am recommending to people to go to the Root Cause Institute and take his courses to address, cancer issues as part of the healing process. And as you know from that interview, right, that certain cancers have certain emotional issues that go with them, like lung cancer and grief, for example. So it's important, to recognize what the issue is for you if you're suffering from cancer, and to address that as well.
So talk about the significance and the importance of fasting.
Well, fasting is something that you can observe readily in nature. That animals, and if you've had pets, you probably have seen this happen. Like earlier this summer, my cat actually went for about 2 weeks without eating, and was just laying around and looked really sick. And all I did was just support him, with some attention and affection, and not try to force him to eat anything. And he completely recovered, and then had a voracious appetite, and went back out to his normal stalking and hunting activities and all of that. So we can see, animals in nature fast spontaneously when they're ill or injured, and how it helps them recover. So we have that model in nature. And then we have, a fair amount of research that show, for example, wound healing is accelerated with fasting. Chemotherapy is tolerated better with fasting. But unfortunately, much of this research is corrupted because they don't actually use fasting. They use these basically low sustenance diets that they call fasting mimicking diets. But you can't mimic fasting when you have digestion, because one of the main ways that fasting brings about this healing, or stimulates your body to heal, is because digestion of food requires a lot of resources of the body. And when you don't have to do digestion, it frees up those resources for healing purposes, like, and detoxification is a big part of that. So the results from the fasting mimicking diet are very much watered down compared to real fasting. But we do have the, long-term observations and large amount of anecdotal evidence for the benefits of fasting from some of the big fasting clinics and people in this business. such as Lauren Lockman is one person that I've worked with, and he taught me a lot about how to fast safely, and supervised me when I did a 26-day fast several years ago.
You did 26 days without eating. Was that a water only fast, which is supposedly the best thing to do?
Yeah, well, there are limitations, and some people don't always have awesome experiences fasting. Usually it's because they didn't really know how to do it properly, or they didn't do it long enough. But yes, I went 26 days with only drinking water, and I was drinking a lot of water by the end. Because when your body is healing, it actually increases your water requirements substantially, because water is one of the big ways that it purges things, right? So you have diarrhea, you have sweating. Just every time you breathe out, your body loses water. They call that insensible water loss. Obviously, when you urinate, you lose a lot of water. So your body increases all of these water losses as a way to purge, contaminants and toxins out of your body when you're healing. So that's why you need more water. And that's one of the mistakes that people can make when they're fasting, is not knowing how much water to drink, or also how to drink water properly that your body actually absorbs it. Because if you chug too much water in a short period of time, your body will just pee it out.
So, what would you recommend? How long? 26 days, like you did?
Well, there seems to be, according to a lot of observation, if we're talking about addressing a serious life-threatening health illness, um, or health issue, that 21 days is kind of a benchmark for the duration of fasting. But
Water
for
only
different
fasting.
things,
Water
yeah,
only
well, I'm
fasting.
only talking about water fasting. I don't think dry fasting is a good idea, because the body is made of water essentially, and depriving it of that impairs the ability to do certain processes. And it can be you can get dehydrated and extremely ill and even die in only a couple of days, with having no water intake. So I don't recommend that. I mean, I know that there are breatharians, and that's a totally different thing. And it's only a very few people have been capable of achieving that. So I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about a regular individual, doing a fast. But for smaller things, like, I always recommend that if you have an injury, acute injury, and this could be, a sprain, a severe sprain, or a pulled ligament, or a muscle tear, all the way up to, broken bone, car accident, fall off a ladder. And you may need other things in those cases to address the injury. But if you start water fasting immediately after the injury, we know from research that the healing of the wounds and the injury is going to be accelerated from that fasting. So I usually, say optimally you'd want to do it until you really start to feel better, right? And that could easily be a week. But if you just do it for, 3 days, that's going to give you a real head start. And it probably will also help decrease the pain response. And then you can transition, if it's any kind of musculoskeletal injury, to a liquid bone broth diet for another 3 days. And that you could consider that kind of like your refeeding, because the collagen in the bone broth is the raw material to rebuild whatever you damaged, right? The bone, the ligament, the tendon, the muscle, all those things. Even cartilage can actually regenerate in your body. I think that's been shown even in scientific papers nowadays. But it needs that raw material to rebuild it. That is the building material. It's like the wood frame for your house. So doing just those two things can really help speed up the healing from acute injuries, and that is a very short-term fast.
That's very important and very significant what you're sharing here, and I think that's really great. And what about food? Because that's such a confusing topic, and there are so many schools on what diet you should be on and what can help you, and being a vegan or a meat eater or keto diet or whatever. I mean, what are your thoughts on food? What's the best diet, Andrew?
Well, to answer this question, because it's a really difficult question to answer because there are no scientific studies on this, not, at least not with humans. Now, with animals, you know what they're supposed to eat because you just go in nature and observe them and you see what they eat, and that's their diet, right? So, unfortunately, we can't observe humans quite in that way these days. And it would be considered unethical to sequester a group of people and, have them only eat the food you gave them for the rest of their life and then measure all their outcomes, including how long they live. There's also a lot of misleading information, like the blue zones, for example, that say that eating a vegetarian heavy or a plant heavy diet is beneficial. Like that's just a propaganda campaign. If you look into it, it doesn't include places that have higher life expectancy, like Hong Kong, which is also the largest per capita consumer of meat in the world. So they eat a meat-centric diet and actually live slightly longer than the blue zone countries. Or just look into the blue zone countries' traditional cuisine, like Sardinia. In the island, that's an island nation, and it's one of the blue zones, and they eat almost all meat. If they live on the coast, it's all seafood. If they live in the interior, it's all land animals. But most of their diet's meat. They only have this small first course of bread or pasta. So that's really misleading. Any epidemiologic studies, like the China study, based on surveys, there's so many sources of error. They include things like pizza as meat, like when they say that meat increases your risk of colon cancer, it includes pizza as meat. So, and many other things that you wouldn't consider meat. So there's a lot of muddy water here. After thinking about this issue and researching it for many years, what I find is the most reliable way to look at this is to look at indigenous people who were studied before colonialism, right? And there's lots of medical anthropology that you can find. And interestingly, all these people, once the Western influence came, their health went down the tubes. But in these societies, they really had no illness. Like the only way that children died, for example, because there were no maternal deaths, there were no child cancers, there were no birth defects, nothing like that. They didn't observe it at all. It was only if a kid drowned or got bitten by a snake or something like that. Those were the only children who died. And throughout the adult life, there was no infirmity. There was no chronic disease. There were no infectious disease, no colds, no TB, no malaria. Of course, all these groups have it now after Western influence, but they didn't when they were first studied. And so, and at the end of their life, they went from being fully, participant in society to dying within a very short time. There were no walkers or crutches or wheelchairs or nursing homes or assisted living facilities. They were fully functional, and then their life was over and it was their time to die. Now, of course, we don't know exactly how long they lived because they didn't keep the kind of records that we keep now, but we do know that they were healthy throughout their lifespan. And so I think looking at what they ate and, of course, what they did to address any health issues like injuries is extremely educational and informs us most likely what is closest to the natural human diet and what we should eat. And there are several different aspects. So, of course, they had no processed food. So everything they ate was actual whole food, right? They grew it, they picked it, they might have grinded it up themselves like they did with maize, which, by the way, is very different from corn currently. It's been engineered right? From what it was, but it was maize that they ate, and that was part of their diet at the time. And they did, eat roots and fruits and things like that, but they almost universally placed the highest importance on meat. And of course, they ate the entire animal, although they shared it among their village. So, some people like who are very fervent carnivores or Weston A. Price diet advocates, eat talk about eating organ meat and how important that is. And we do see in nature, right? Like lions will eat the liver first, and even orcas will kill great white sharks and just eat the liver and leave the rest of the carcass. But when a village, right, kills an animal, there's one liver in the animal, but there's 30 people in the village. So they all get 1/30th, of the liver. And, so that's the kind of way I think about it. So they all had a very high importance of meat in their diet. They ate various plant things, including grains, but they were much closer to their wild form. They weren't like the European forms that were engineered over centuries by selective hybridization, essentially the same thing as GMO. Even the first GMO product was before any knowledge of genetics. So, right, it's just done by those kinds of techniques.
So we are still carnivores, really, actually.
Yeah, well, they're omnivores, but they are, a high portion of their diet is carnivorous. And they also, eat only locally, right? They didn't import any food from anywhere else. They did go on treks at certain times of the year to find food that was a little bit further away, that was different from what they had access to in their local territory. So that did increase some variety, but we're talking about, from maybe 50 miles away at most, right? Because they didn't have cars, they were walking to do these treks. And long treks were part of their culture and probably part of what supported their health, the ability to do that. So they were local, they ate seasonally. They did do some like food preservation, like drying things and fermentation, but those, right, are kind of different than eating fresh food. But they didn't have tropical fruits, in the middle of the winter up in Alaska, right? Like the Inuit people pretty much ate, whale, blubber, seal meat. They had practically no plant food available to them, outside a very small window of the year. Whereas other places, had a lot of access to, especially in tropical and semi-tropical areas. So they did, eat this way, but they didn't have, large scale agriculture at all, where people had subsided on bread, because that's going to give you nutritional deficiencies. And I think it's important also to mention that any diet that requires you to take special supplements because they're not in the food, that's definitely not the right diet. So I'm specifically talking about a vegan diet, right? Because you get deficient in things that just aren't in plants. And now it can be really useful as a healing diet or, a cleansing diet or an elimination diet, and can have amazing results. And I recommend it, but it can't be something that you subsist on for the rest of your life. And, there are lots of people in the vegan community who learned this the hard way, and changed, because they realized it wasn't sustainable. Some people can do better than others on this kind of a diet, but eventually it's going to take its toll because you're just not getting everything you need.
Exactly, yeah. So what, in your opinion, is the best way to lose weight? I, for one, would like to lose a few pounds, but I mean, what's the best way, do you think?
Well, that's another subject where there's tons of people who give you the wrong answer, and they usually have some money to make from their answer. So that's why I actually have a free masterclass on that you can also find with How to Avoid the Emergency Department. It's my weight loss masterclass. And it's not through exercise, although exercise is definitely a good thing and will improve your health. It just doesn't lead to losing weight. It's all about the diet, and here's the big thing. So there's something called the Randall cycle, which is not a cycle, but it's a switching mechanism. And we know that, the things we need, right, in our body, the macros that they call them, right, is protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Well, it turns out that we actually don't need carbohydrates at all in our diet. We can live extremely healthy without eating any carbs whatsoever. They're non-essential. They're essential in a sense, but our body can make them by itself and meet our requirements easily, right? So this is what the ketogenic diet is based on. But nonetheless, our body is capable of using carbohydrates that we eat in metabolism. And metabolism, right, we know we're talking about, using oxygen and either carbohydrates or fats and generating ATP. Okay, now it's widely thought that this is what actually gives our body energy, but I'll tell you that that's actually been disproven. So that's why I talk about it just in the way that I am, right? It's feeding metabolism, and ATP is necessary. It's just that it doesn't provide the energy. It has other functions, which I could get into if you want, but let me get to the main point. So when we eat carbohydrates predominantly and low fat in, let's say, in a meal, our body is then going to use the carbs to feed metabolism. If we eat a fatty meal with low to no carbs, then we're going, like, say we have a steak with just some lettuce, right? That has practically no carbs. So in that case, our body is going to metabolize fat only. Now, if we mix the two, okay, so like we have a sandwich, meat on bread, or meat and potatoes or something like that, then our body is going to metabolize the carbs and store the fat. And that actually is a good survival mechanism for us, because the carbs, if they, we have very limited ability to store any carbs. We can store some as glycogen, but beyond that, they're going to circulate around the blood, and they're actually toxic to our blood vessels, right? And this is what happens in diabetes. So our body doesn't want to do that. It has to use up the carbohydrates, but the fat is very useful for the body, and it's non-damaging at all. And we just store it and create body fat. So the way that this switching mechanism it works is called the Randall cycle. Now, this is not something that's part of your medical school curriculum. I originally first only heard of it from Bart Kay, who is one of the kind of carnivore advocates on the interwebs, as he calls them. And we did one show together. He's a very interesting guy. And then I did a whole bunch more research about it. And then I tried it myself, of course, and observed what a lot of other people who do a carnivore diet or a vegan diet. And so if you do a carb-rich diet that's very low in fat, and you need to have some fat because you get sick and die without it, right? So you need to include a little bit. They will lose weight on that diet, almost irrespective of how much they eat. Provided you stick to actual whole foods. So I don't mean just eat bread. I mean eat whole real grains like quinoa, potatoes, sweet potatoes, turnips, barley, those kinds of things, but not in a highly processed, refined form. And you'll lose weight, or eat a low to no carb type diet, like a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, and you will lose weight there. And right, this is it's been known about for a while, but not quite in this way. And so that's what it takes to ensure that that you'll start dropping body fat. But don't go eat a whole bunch of processed food. Don't do a ketogenic diet and get keto snacks with chemicals, because that will subvert your efforts and cause additional health problems. Just stick to real whole foods, and this is a winning combination. You'll definitely lose weight.
It's almost impossible to get like real food these days because it's full of toxins. And in regards to toxins, isn't it futile to, like eliminate all toxins from your everyday life, which is almost impossible? And it could also be a psychological thing, actually. I mean, how can you please talk about this? Because
Yeah.
every time people want to do something and change their diet, how do they know that what they're going to eat now is not also full of toxins? And don't we need that also in a way? Don't maybe our bodies can excrete that and use it? Is it all bad?
Well, when I'm talking about toxins, I'm generally not talking about things from nature. I'm talking about, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, immunizations. And you're right, we can't completely 100% avoid exposure to these things because they're in the air. If we go out into public buildings, we're going to be exposed to them. But we can certainly make a big dent. And, you can take this as far as you want. Of course, I have a lot of educational resources, and some things are a lot more dangerous than others. Like, some of the chemicals used in antiperspirants, for example, are very harmful, and they stop your body's normal functioning of, detoxing in your armpits. So if you have really bad smelling armpits, that's because there's bad smelling stuff inside your body that is trying to get out. That's not a fact of life. If you do the work to help your body expel those things completely, you won't smell that bad. Okay. So
but you really want to
something
smell
much
good
more
with the
important.
right scent or the right cologne, right? Or
Well,
perfume.
you can, make your own fragrance using like essential oils, for example, flower essences, think sandalwood, things like that. Just beware that, all the cosmetic products that you're going to find on the market for the most part are going to contain nasty things. So perfumes, they almost all contain phthalates because phthalates disperse the fragrance. And so it makes it more enjoyable or more perceptible to your nose. But they are endocrine disrupting chemicals. So they can cause, health issues. But if you make mixture of essential oils in a carrier oil and roll some of this in your armpit, you can have a very nice fragrance that kind of masks some of the body odor, but it's not harmful. So the same
But
thing with
wouldn't the
food. Like
body, wouldn't the body, well, given the right circumstances, be able to cleanse itself from these toxins that are so difficult to avoid?
well, yeah, absolutely, as long as you don't block your body doing that. And most of the antiperspirant, and I'm not talking about a deodorant. A deodorant is just a fragrance, right? I'm talking about the chemicals that turn off the sweating in your armpits, because that sweating is your body purging toxins. So if you block it by turning it off with a chemical, that's working against your body, and then your body's going to try to expel it in some other way, and then you might block that too, right? We have, I was recently talking, because we spoke about cancer earlier, but this won't be so controversial. But I was talking with someone whose parent is dealing with cancer, and they're basically giving these drugs to relieve symptoms, but those symptoms are actually the body trying to get rid of these things. So first, they're giving a anti-diarrheal drug to basically, now they're having diarrhea because their colon is trying to get rid of stuff, right? It's like your internal pressure washer. And now you're turning that off. So the stuff stays in and then it tries to come out another way. And she was getting nausea. So what do? Give an anti-nausea drug to turn that off, because obviously if you can't, crap it out, you can throw it up. But if that's suppressed too, well, then what's the next step, right? And that's the problem, is that we misinterpret our body's healing signs for signs of illness, and we try to suppress them. We're really suppressing the body's healing. And the same thing is true with inflammation. Inflammation is self-limited healing process of the body. When we take drugs that are anti-inflammatories, they're blocking the body's efforts to heal. And we may feel better in the short term, but that's going to manifest as a more serious problem in the long term.
So what about parasites? What's your take on parasites? Is that something that can cause more diseases and illnesses, or is it actually beneficial for you?
Yeah, well, it's beneficial. It's part of nature's response to, try and remediate these issues and return to homeostasis. And, many parasites, we're talking about worms, I think predominantly here, but there are, other alleged types that cause us harm. They're often contain high levels of heavy metals. So our body's contaminated with heavy metals, and we may block our body's ability to get them out. Like one of the biggest things that comes out in sweat are heavy metals. You can find lots of research studies that show this, as well as phthalates that I mentioned before, and BPA and related compounds also come out in the sweat, and many other things. So if we're blocking the sweat, or we live a lifestyle that we never sweat, like we stay in climate controlled buildings all the time, we don't do any kind of intense labor or exercise, so we never sweat, well, then our body can't get rid of these things. So worms start to grow, and we're all exposed to parasites. Like any food you eat, whether you wash it or whatever, it has worm eggs in there and larvae and all kinds of things. You just taking in a breath, you could breathe these things in. So you're getting exposed all the time, but they don't necessarily grow in your body unless it's the right environment. And if you're riddled with heavy metals, then worms are going to start growing at some point, and they're trying to eat up the heavy metals and help you get them out of your body. And of course, it's their food, so it benefits them in their life cycle, right? They're not doing it for selfless reasons, but nature is doing it to balance out everything. And then when you listen to that signal and start to support what your body's trying to do to heal and purge those things, like making yourself sweat, for example, and many other things, well, then what happens? The worms, they don't continue to thrive in your body. They leave your body.
In a large quantity, it's not good, obviously, but in a smaller or more limited quantity, it can do some good in your body.
Well, it may not be good for you, the individual, if they're there in a large quantity, because it may mean that your body is no longer viable to live and that it's time for your life to be over. And, what happens when our body dies is all of the microorganisms and parasites that live in our body or develop from, the precursors inside of our body, they consume the matter of the body from the inside out, right? That's what normal decomposition is. And this is why if you, see a body that's decomposing naturally, it will go through this phase that it will blow up like a balloon. And it's really kind of disturbing to see, but I've seen it in real life. And it's because all the microorganisms that are eating your body from the inside, they produce some gaseous waste. And it causes the skin to inflate like a balloon.
Oh my God, what an image we get here, huh? But it's an important thing to talk about. Talk about DNA and genetics, because you've I think you've talked about this. Do you believe that DNA exists? Because you've been
Well,
controversial saying that viruses do not exist. They haven't been isolated. But I mean, we have the same genetics as our parents. We look like our parents, and we there's this likeness, and we inherit a lot of things from our parents and from the generations above that. So DNA and genetics, Andrew?
yeah, well, one, let me say that, this isn't a matter that I would apply belief to because, like I believe in myself. I believe that I have a purpose in this existence, right? Those are things I believe, but this, I would have an educated opinion on. And going back to college, actually, one of the postdocs that was involved with Watson and Crick when they, allegedly discovered the double helix of DNA was my biology professor, Dr. Vernon Ingram, if anyone wants to look him up. So, of course, I was like blown away that I had this guy as a professor and I believed everything at the time. But there was one interesting thing that I observed, and I wasn't even familiar with this word at the time. I learned more about it later. But he called it, and he typed, put this up on the chalkboard, the central dogma of biology. Now, how could you use the word dogma in science, right? In science that's been awarded a Nobel Prize and such, because dogma has nothing to do with science. But was the idea that DNA codes the proteins and it gets transcribed to RNA and then gets translated into proteins. And that's called the central dogma of biology. Now, my research on germ theory revealing that germ theory is a false paradigm and has essentially been disproven or refuted to the point that it has no validity, I started to look into other aspects of science, including other theories in biology. And it turns out that genetics is another false theory. Or in other words, what we think about it, that it determines heredity, that it codes all the proteins in our body, that it's the blueprint of life, those things are unproven. Of course, DNA does exist in reality because it exists as a synthetic chemical. In fact, you can buy a DNA synthesizer machine that you put in various chemical reagents and program it. And then, so many hours later, it gives you DNA. They make similar ones for RNA. In fact, this is how they manufactured the mRNA, quote unquote, is using one of these machines. But it only exists as a synthetic chemical. And if you look at the alleged scientific experiments that establish that it's in biological organisms, it's actually laughable. Because one, they didn't even go and test multiple organisms to see if they find it. And then two, all it was that they added phosphorus and then they found phosphorus. They didn't find DNA, they just found phosphorus content in the pus of wounds. And then that is the main proof that DNA is in every organism. Now, it can be very impressive to look at scientific papers in the modern era and see Southern blots and Western blots and sequencing results and the BLAST database and all of this. But if you actually look at the scientific methods of how they produce all these results, all you have is the presumption or the assumption that you're working with some natural material that's a DNA sequence. Now, I'll make an analogy here that with fingerprints. Now, you can look at our actual fingerprints, right? And this has been used for quite a while, and note that it's very unique to each individual. But I'll bet that you didn't know that if you look at fingerprints of first-degree relatives, especially I think father-daughter relationship, they're actually also very, very similar. And you can use this to see if someone is a first degree relative with some accuracy. However, no one has made the claim that your fingerprint is actually the blueprint of all the proteins in your body and the blueprint of life. Yet we can work with it and we can show similar things that we say with DNA. So you can't look at some of the things like, the DNA sequencing that says, you're this or that, and those things are fraught with errors. If you look at mutations that are said to cause disease, well, you have people without the mutation who have the disease and people with the mutation who don't have the disease. So tell me, how is that related, or how does that make sense? But inheritance, of course, is real. We can observe that with our own eyes. But we don't know the mechanism that we inherited something. So, for example, you inherit your religion, but that's not genetic. There's no gene for Christians that's different from a gene for Jews or a gene for Muslims. You inherit poverty. There's no gene for poverty or wealth, right? Those are obvious examples.
Two people creating a baby, and so it's like a mix of both of them and lots of other generations before those parents. And it's clear that you can see you even look alike, like a mix of the two parents, usually.
Yeah. Yes. Or you may resemble one parent over the other and have very similar traits. Like, all three of my kids were blonde when they were born. And for, not immediately when they were born, but when their hair grew in, and for the first several years of their life. And, the mother of my first two kids had kind of blondish or light brown hair. So I thought, oh, it must be from her. But interestingly, then the mother of my third child had, very, very dark, almost black hair. And our child was also blonde. So I was going through some boxes at some point and found this baby book of me that I had got from my mom. So it was describing me as a baby. And guess what? I had blonde hair as a baby, right? So I passed that to my kids somehow. Now, of course, we might assume that it's genetic, but what's really the proof? We don't. Like, even a simple thing as eye color that
we can see it. We can see it if we look alike, or if
we can see
look alike.
We can see the inheritance, but what's the proof that it's determined by a certain genes? We can't see any genes, right? Even under the most powerful microscope, you can't see a gene. In fact, among the scientific community, there's no agreed upon definition of what a gene even is. So that's why no one can say how many genes, even though they sequence the entire human, genome, allegedly, they can't tell you exactly how many genes are in there because they don't even know what a gene is. They don't know how to identify it. So all you see are estimates, and they range by the tens of thousands of genes. So, we're told that it's been determined by genes, but we haven't actually seen it, and we don't actually have any direct evidence that that's the case.
Some of the voices are similar to your father's voice, and maybe it's just a mystery within this holographic simulation.
Look, there can be many explanations of what, some of it is just because, maybe we directly observe the behavior of our relatives and we copy it, or we were fed, the same food as our brothers and sisters, and it's the same food our parents eat. So that food has an effect on us. But obviously some things like, the personality, which, when you have your own child, you see very early on that they display their own individual personality characteristics. Like my young son is extremely stubborn and resistant to, direction he wants to do things his own way. And
I wonder where he got that from, huh?
It's not like, I'm not like that, actually. I mean, I'm an independent thinker, but I'll go with the flow when it's socially appropriate. So, He probably got that from his mother, actually. But nevertheless, right? This is before the child has much exposure, to observing you and your behavior.
But we're
Um,
different souls and different bodies. That doesn't have any. That does not have anything to do with our physical exterior.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about, the personality, not the physical manifestation, but we still see that, we see these patterns develop, and often they're similar to the parent or another ancestor. I mean, they could be their soul reincarnated even. I mean, that certainly is a possibility, but we could probably sit here and brainstorm a dozen different explanations, including some that we talked about earlier. Like there could be some, transfer of information that occurs non-physically, right, through vibration or electromagnetic radiation, many other things that could potentially happen. But those don't have any scientific evidence either, right? But we can definitely agree that we inherit a lot of things, and we can pass a lot of things down. And I think we want to pass only the good things down, but unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. The What I have a problem with is the assumption that those things are all determined by some chemical gene sequence in our body, and that controls us in our destiny.
Great. And finally, this is a hair-raising question. Do pardon the pun. The last time you were on the show, you were completely bald, but now you have an impressive head of hair. And I'm very fascinated about that. You even had long hair for a while. And so do talk about what happened. Was it genetics? Did it just grow out? Did you have a hair transplant? Or what went on, Andrew? Looks
Well,
good.
it's not genetics. I definitely didn't have any hair transplants. And that seems awfully crazy to do, in my opinion, although a lot of people have done it. I still have a bald spot in the back, but it's not nearly as big as it was. And I was shaving my head because there wasn't much hair. I couldn't get it to look decent in any way. And, I think of actually that the hair contains sort of some of my masculine essence and strength. And so it was important to have something there that could contain that. And that's really why I grew it out so long. And I just completed that phase and decided that I didn't need to have the long hair anymore. But I essentially learned a lot about nature and what are the things that contribute to this hair loss. Although even if you look back in history, it was, present before the modern toxic environment to some degree, and just used a combination of natural factors to try and stimulate my scalp to detoxify and to grow hair again. And over a period of, 6 to 12 months, roughly, I had some pretty impressive results. And I've continued to be able to maintain that and make some additional progress. In fact, it was kind of frustrating when I had long hair, because I had a lot of short hairs mixed in with the long hairs, because they were like growth coming back from hair follicles that weren't making any hair before, and it made it a little bit difficult to style and groom. I'm actually in the beginning of August, I'm going to be giving my hair regrowth workshop, because I developed a protocol based on this experience and what I learned, and lots of others have had good success as well.
Okay, so people can learn from this, and you have a protocol and you have a course about this. Did you use like
Yes.
castor oil or stuff? I mean, I heard some people use castor oil.
Yeah, well, castor oil is something I'm a very big fan of, and I have used it in a lot of different ways, and it is in some of my protocols, but not in this particular protocol, except as like a hair treatment or conditioner, like a small amount of it in your hair can be really nice. I don't personally use it because my hair is oily to begin with, and so I don't add any oil to it. But I don't wash. Part of it is not using products on your hair, like not using shampoo or conditioner or anything like that. And it's been, 2.5 years since I used any of that.
Wow, how do you wash
Um,
your hair then?
well, I normally wash it by using a boar bristle brush, and you have to, do like 100 strokes basically of all your hair from scalp to tip. And then just water, like just agitation and clean water. And then every 2 weeks to a month, I use a paste of bentonite clay on the hair and scalp, and that's for like a deep cleaning. Like this summer, I have a pool that is a saltwater pool, but I found actually that just swimming on a daily basis, I get some kind of residue from the pool in my hair, and it completely went away with when I did the clay treatment. And so that's an excellent way to clean and detoxify your hair and scalp is using calcium bentonite clay. It's one of my favorite materials, comes from ancient Ayurvedic medicine.
Wow, that's fascinating, and people can learn more about that as well. So now, your final thoughts, your best message for people having heard all of this, and it's been absolutely wonderful. But what's the best message and your final thoughts that you can give to people?
Well, we talked a lot about sovereignty and how it relates to Agenda 2030. We went into detail about how to apply that to health. And I have kind of a mantra or a tagline, which is be your own health authority. And that's really what I promote, and it's my most important message. And all of my platforms are really built around that, because you don't have to, go into the medical hospital, be tested for things that don't exist, be given all your up-to-date immunizations, get poison drugs, and all of that to have good health. In fact, almost all of that works against your health and is very dangerous. So learn how to, take care of your own body, mind, and spirit to optimize your health and vitality. It's well within reach. It does require some effort, much more on the front end. And once you get in the rhythm, it's no more difficult to keep going than it is to stick with your standard American, poisonous lifestyle. So that's what I would like people to take away more than anything else.
That's absolutely wonderful. And please mention your website, how people can sign up for your courses or your lectures or your, I don't know if you do consultations or something, but
I
do
do,
tell
yes.
people how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, well, go to my website, andrewkaufmanmd.com. You can sign up for my newsletter, then you'll be introduced to everything that I have to offer. On the website, there's a free resources page, which has a ton of stuff to get you started, including my signature Ultimate Detox protocol, the Dr. Andy's True Medicine Cabinet, which is a list of all the supplies, medical supplies that you need to handle any health situation, both emergency and non-emergency situations, the weight loss masterclass, and many other resources there. And if you like what you see, then obviously you can go more in depth. I offer the definitive clinical workshops, which give you complete protocols and all the knowledge on how to use them for all of the health, problems that we've discussed today, and many other things. And of course, don't forget my Medicamentum Authentica Shilajit, which is one thing that we can't get from the modern food system, is trace minerals, and they're very, very important. And we take it seriously and have transparency with all the testing, the heavy metal levels. We know the entire chain of custody for this product, because I use the same rigor as I do for all the information I present, and it's the only product that I sell. So definitely check out all of those things, and you'll have an opportunity to enrich yourself in many ways.
Wonderful. Absolutely great. This has been a show full of information. You've been very inspirational. It's been wonderful to talk to you again, and you are a great man. And thank you for joining us once again on Age of Truth TV, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Thank you so much.
It's been great, Lucas.
Wonderful. We covered a lot, huh?
And I like how you challenge some of the things I say. That's really important, for the viewers to see that, there's a lot of thought that goes into these opinions. It's not just, blanket statements or anything like that.
I am the voice of the viewers, really, so I have to do that. That's what all journalists or investigative reporters should do.
Thanks, Lucas. And, if we do this again in the future, we could also get into more, esoteric topics like how, organ transplant is a human sacrifice ritual and things like that, that might be more, your normal content.
This sounds wonderful, and we would love to do that. Do a follow-up. So consider this part 1, and then we'll do part 2 as, in the near future at some point, right?
Yeah, sounds great.
Wonderful. We'd love that. Right, Lauge? Are you back now?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was great. Very good to have you on again, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to see you too, Lauge.
Absolutely. I hope we can meet in person at some point.
Yeah, that would be great. All right, guys. Well, take care, and we'll stay in touch.
Too.
We will.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. You too.
Thank you so much to Dr. Andrew Kaufman, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruth.tv as well. Please also subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon. Your support is greatly appreciated and very needed. And on behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.